Season 2, Episode 20 of the Berean Manifesto, brought to you by the Ekklesian House. This is Pastor Bill, and over the next 10 minutes or so, we are going to talk about stepping out on the water. Of course, for most people, the first thing that comes to mind is Peter stepping out on the water at the behest of Jesus in Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 through 33. We can gather more details about this event from Mark chapter 6, verses 45 through 56, and John chapter 6, verses 16 through 24. I've already included these extra details in what I'm about to read to you, so if you're following along, and I throw out some details not in Matthew 14, then you can find those in Mark 6 and or John 6. All right. Matthew chapter 14, 22 through 33, with added details, reads, "Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, to Bethsaida, Capernaum, while he dismissed the crowds. After dismissing the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Well into the night, he was there alone. Meanwhile, the boat was already 3 or 4 miles from land, battered by the churning waves. Jesus saw them straining at the oars because the wind was against them. He came toward them walking on the sea very early in the morning and wanted to pass by them. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. 'It's a ghost,' they said, and they cried out in fear. Immediately Jesus spoke to them. 'Have courage, it is I. Don't be afraid.' 'Lord, if it's you,' Peter answered him, 'command me to come to you on the water.' He said, 'Come.' And climbing out of the boat, Peter started walking on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the strength of the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, 'Lord, save me!' Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand, caught hold of him, and said to him, 'You of little faith, why did you doubt?' When they got into the boat, the wind ceased. They were completely astounded because they had not understood about the loaves. Instead, their hearts were hardened. At once, the boat was at the shore where they were heading. Then those in the boat worshipped him and said, 'Truly, you are the Son of God.' If you know me well, then you know that my favorite apostle, disciple, biblical personality is Peter. I think a lot about Peter and really see him as this amazing example of the transformative power of Christ that takes over all our lives when we come to salvation. I suspect that Matthew feels the same way, and when he brings Peter up in his writing, my ears always perk up, so to speak. I think Matthew invokes Peter in his retelling when he specifically wants to give the reader someone to relate to. I mean, who hasn't lost their cool and maybe not sliced someone's ear off, but really messed things up and needed Jesus to intervene on their behalf to reattach that severed ear? Let's break this particular event down. So the disciples are ministering with Christ, and this crazy miracle happens where very little bread and fish feed a huge crowd of people. But for the disciples, this is just another day at the office, right? We read that their hearts had been hardened. So Jesus goes off to pray, and the disciples board a boat to head across the sea. The wind kicks up, and they're paddling hard to stay on course and gain any distance toward their goal. They see Jesus as he's walking past their boat and call out to him. Jesus calls Peter out onto the water, and things are going great until Peter takes his eyes off of Jesus and begins to sink. Jesus pulls Peter up, and they get back in the boat together, and immediately the boat is where they were going. We can all relate to this story, yes? Okay, maybe not all of us can relate with taking a rowboat several miles across a sea at night. But in our Christian walk and service, day in and day out, while God is doing miraculous things around us, we can relate to becoming complacent and seeing the things God's doing as ordinary. We can relate to our hearts being hardened, and what was once a calling that excited and inspired us can become day-to-day grind, ordinary, just going through the motions. Then what? We press on, right? We get in that boat and we head the direction God gave us and we start rowing. We look at each other and pretend everything's okay when secretly in our hearts we're asking, where's Jesus? It's been a while since I've felt his presence or gotten any direction from him. And you convince yourself that it's just you and everyone else seems to have it all together. But we're all in the same boat, doing our best to keep up pace, pretending everything is okay, and wondering why it seems like others have it all figured out while you're a hot mess. In that moment, the water churning, the wind blowing, the ship rocking, and everybody struggling to keep the boat on course, Jesus comes to the rescue. Nope. What did we read earlier? Jesus saw them straining at the oars because the wind was against them. He came toward them walking on the sea very early in the morning and wanted to pass by them. Jesus fully intended to pass them by and let them struggle. It sounds kind of like Jesus was being a jerk, but that's not what's going on. As a father, sometimes I let my kids struggle. I don't immediately come to the rescue when they're trying to figure something out or trying to do something that's hard to accomplish. I wait until they call out, and not just that they call my name in frustration, but that they call from a place of almost desperation, this place of deep need. We're in the dark. We're struggling against the winds of life, trying to keep the boat on course, and we suddenly catch a glimpse of Jesus. The disciples were frightened by his appearing out on the water. We do the same thing when we catch that glimpse and suddenly become very acutely aware that Jesus wasn't actively involved in what we've been doing. We've been struggling to keep things on track, and Jesus hasn't been here in what we've been doing. So we cry out, if that's you, Jesus, then tell me what to do. Give me some direction here, Lord. The disciples are tired, and the calling has become work. They're beyond frustrated into desperate. They cry out for help or relief, and Jesus' reply is for Peter to step out of the only comfort and safety they have, out onto the chopping waves. And when we talk about callings, far too often we envision positions in established ministry, pastor, elder, missionary. While these callings are the most visible of the callings, they aren't the only callings you're called to. We move in and out of seasons where we're called to traditional established ministry or into the secular market as a light to the world. Whatever or wherever you're calling, when you're burned out, when your heart is hardened, when it's all become the humdrum grind and you're doing everything you can to keep focused, to keep smiling while inside you're spiraling out of control, when it's taking all you can to keep that boat on course as you're paddling against the winds and the waves in the pitch of the night, will you have the courage, the will, the conviction of faith to step out of that boat, to step out of the comfort and safety of that boat onto the water with your eyes focused on Jesus. Because with your eyes on Jesus, the wind is still blowing, the waves are still churning, and the danger still exists. But the moment you take your eyes off Jesus, those circumstances of reality hijack your faith, and you begin sinking. But when you keep your eyes on Jesus, you can invite him back into the boat, back into your calling, and watch your ministry step up into the next level. This is Pastor Bill saying, until next time.